Thanks.
Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. Thanks for joining us tonight. I won't keep us too long since we have a lot of content to get through tonight. I just wanted to be the first to welcome everyone to our second night of our Career Kickstarter program with America's Future Foundation. This program is kind of designed to bring the best job search tips and help you land your career during these uncertain times we're in. So we're going to talk about keys to success and how to polish your resume and how to prepare for an interview and all those details that you need to know to be successful in the professional world. First of all, I wanted to thank Leadership Institute and Hillsdale's DC campus, as well as Talent Market, for co-sponsoring tonight's event. You'll learn a little bit more about those organizations as well as our other panelists tonight. Before we get started, if you don't know who AF is, I wanted to introduce you to America's Future Foundation. We have a nationwide network of liberty-minded young professionals. We have unique opportunities to get connected and have policy talks on limited government, free markets, and personal responsibility. There's all kinds of ways to get connected with AF through our Writing Fellows program and several different monthly events in about 20 chapter cities around the state. So if you're not connected with AF, send me an email and we'll get you in the network and get you involved. Before I turn things over to our panel tonight, I also wanted to introduce our moderator. Patti is the Director of Career Programs at Leadership Institute, and she is what I consider a career expert and kind of a Jane of all trades, as she might say herself, with all things professional tips and getting people in the right job in the movement. So Patti can dispute me on that if that doesn't sound right. Hopefully that was a good intro to all the good things she does. So I'll go ahead and turn things over to her. And then if you, I also wanted to say, if you have any questions tonight, feel free to put those in the Q&A box and Patti will be reading those out for our panelists. So thanks so much. I'll turn things over to Patti.
Thank you very much, Kristen. More of a Jill of all trades, not the Jane, the Jill of all trades. I want to welcome all of you here tonight. I'm really excited to do this. I am so bummed that we have to do it virtually because there's so many of you that we really want to meet in person. Unfortunately, we can't. So you just have to stare at our faces tonight, but you're so lucky because they are 5 beautiful, awesome, smart, awesome faces. And you're going to learn a lot tonight. I want all of my panelists this evening to give a couple minutes just to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Teri, then we're going to go to Katy, and then finally Claire, and we'll get right into the questions for you. So Teri, please let us know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi, I hope everyone's having a lovely evening. My name is Teri Akpovi. I'm the Senior Programs Recruiter here at the Charles Koch Institute in our education programs. And we have 2 educational programs that I think would really serve this audience really well for young professionals, which is our Koch Internship program, which is a 10-week paid internship program where interns get the opportunity to do 1 day of professional development training and self-actualization where they learn about themselves more, and then 4 days where they're getting work experience with one of our participating organizations. Same layout for our Koch Associate program. That's a 10-month program. Which is a leadership accelerator and a career accelerator. And I'll be happy to go into more details as we go through the Q&A. And we'll make sure that we send you guys information on how to apply, and both are paid opportunities. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, and I'm excited to chat with you all today.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Katy Gambella. I see some familiar names in the attendees. If you don't know me, I work at an organization called Talent Market. We're a free market nonprofit that helps other free market nonprofits hire. I've been at Talent Market for 2 years now, and my focus is on more entry, junior, mid-level roles. Before I was hired, Talent Market only worked on executive and senior level roles, and I was hired on specifically to reach out to young professionals. So I do give a lot of career advice to intern programs. I read tons of resumes. I do a lot of phone screens. I just did 9 in the last day because I went on vacation and that was my punishment. But it's been a really awesome 2 years with Talent Market. And if you don't know already, you can send your resume into us. And as roles and opportunities come up that fit which we are looking for, we will send them your way. People will ask, I'll get this question, how are you different than conservativejobs.com, which lovely LI runs and is also awesome. Definitely get connected with them. And I like to say that any role that you see on our website, it means that one of the 3 of us, there are 3 of us at Talent Market, are working to fill that role. And you will also find our roles on conservativejobs.com. So I often encourage people to go over there and fill out a profile as well. But that's a common question I get at almost everything like this. So we are very similar. We work hand in hand. We love LI, but Talent Market and conservative jobs do fill 2 a little bit different niches. And yeah, I'm excited to chat today. I do wish we were all in person. Welcome to Washington is always great. But thanks for having us, Kristen and Claire. You can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hi, everybody. My name's Claire Aguda. I'm calling in from Wilmington, Delaware, so just a little bit north of where all y'all would be located had things been kind of normal. But it's good to see everybody tonight. Thanks so much, Kristen and Ath and everyone for putting this on. It's a great opportunity. And if you haven't heard about ISI before, it stands for the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. Lots of syllables there. We've been around since 1953. We were founded by William F. Buckley right after he wrote God and Man at Yale to kind of combat the progressive takeover at campus. So here we kind of like to joke that we're the OG in the conservative movement. We've been around for quite a while and got to help get Federalist Society started, help get Heritage Foundation started. You know, we've been there from the beginning. We call ourselves kind of the safe space for conservatives on campus, for students and faculty. And we're the place to go to kind of discuss conservative ideas, discuss Edmund Burke, discuss Adam Smith, you know, kind of all those things that you would have learned in liberal arts education probably 100 years ago that you don't hear about anymore. We kind of fill that void and that gap. I've been here about 4 years. Before that, I was at the John Jay Institute in Philadelphia, which is a very good program if any of you guys are interested in something to do in the interim after you graduated college. But I've been at ISI, like I said, about 4 years since then, and I currently serve as, I guess, the Patti of ISI. I wear whatever hat they need at the moment, usually kind of focusing on fundraising and alumni. So, yeah.
Awesome. I am so excited to hear from each of you. We're going to start off with the question that is on the mind of all of the attendees. What are the jobs that are open right now? We have a lot of entry-level people looking. They're unsure what to apply for. What are the jobs that you have or that you know of, and what are the jobs that they should be applying to? I'll let Katie take the first one.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. So as a whole, in general, what we've seen during the pandemic, at least at the Talent Market, is that there are a lot more communications jobs, that are being hired for right now anyway. If you stop and think about that for a second, it makes complete sense. A lot of organizations are focusing heavily on their digital marketing, digital meetings, communications via social media, all kinds of things that they maybe didn't focus on before, which means they're filling a lot of digital media marketing communications gaps that they may have had as a smaller organization. I find that often the smaller organizations, and even smaller than ISI, the 5-6 people organizations, they really all of a sudden realize that comms is really important. So I would say there's been an uptick for us in comms roles. As far as entry-level positions, I have to say we have fewer than we did before the pandemic, which again makes sense just because entry-level roles are kind of been put on hold a little bit. That isn't to say they're disappeared altogether. There are certainly roles on our website right now that you can apply for if you are entry-level. I just have found that they are a little bit, they're not as in demand, which as a 2010 grad, I feel your pain, 2020 people, because I graduated in the middle of the recession and could not find a job. So I'm here to tell you that COVID might have taken some of the jobs off the table for you, but that doesn't mean you can't find one. So I didn't give you any specific roles because I don't want to just read a list to you. If you really want to look at all the roles we're working on, they're up on Talent Market. I think there's 27 or so on there. And there's certainly our entry, mid, and junior level roles listed right now.
Teri, if you could add some about the roles that are at Stand Together. and what people should be looking for and applying to?
Yeah, so right now I have to mimic what Katie said. We always have a need for communication roles, whether it was before the pandemic or after pandemic. We've also had a need in tech support. Since there's been like a lot more issues with computers and technology, we've had more of a demand for tech support, but we still have a number of roles with like our Catalyst organizations, whether it's in education development, community organizations. So a lot of those are like entry to mid-level roles. Like they're looking for somebody that might have like 2 to 3 years of experience. I think that's still relatively entry level. But if you go like to standtogether.com or cki.org, you'll see like all the list of roles. And I think we're one of the few organizations that, since we're still really big, we still do have a demand for entry level roles. And that kind of goes into my spiel with our education programs, because we found that a lot of organizations are not really willing to make a bet on entry level roles without having a little bit exposure to the talent before making that commitment. And so that is where like our internship and our associate program comes in really well, because the individuals get to work at that organization 4 days a week, whether it's the internship for 10 weeks and then maybe convert into a full-time role, or in the associate program where they're working there as a salaried employee for 10 months. And then that organization really develops an affinity for that individual and then converts them to a full-time role. And so we found that organizations are more open to hiring entry-level talent once they've been exposed to the value creation that that individual can do during programming. So that's, I didn't answer actually the question, but that's in policy. So that's in policy, that's in communication, that's in community development, that's in economic opportunity, that's in poverty alleviation, that's in tech and innovation. Right now, there's a big demand for permissionless innovation. And so if you are into tech policy and you're wanting to go on the side of less regulation when it comes to technology and like emerging technologies, we found that we are working with like the Hewlett Foundation and a number of other organizations that have a really high demand for individuals that want to go into tech policy. And so that is a whole nother aspect that we've added into our Koch Associate program. And there's a high demand for people in that field right now.
Patti, you're on mute.
Yep, I muted myself again. I said it's really cool, and it makes me wonder, and this is a question I have, and I'm gonna start with you, Claire, on this one, is when you are applying for certain jobs, and the things that Teri just talked about, there are many, many different types of jobs, and if they're all entry level and it's all different things that you're interested in applying for, what should you have together? Like, what are the materials that you should put together when you're applying for a job? Do you need a pristine resume? How long should your resume be? What should be included? If you're applying for 2 different jobs at the same organization, should you use the same resume? And what do you put in your cover letter for these things? So what tips do you have for people that way?
Sure thing. So unless you are an academic, keep that resume to 1 page. Make it clear and easy to read. You want to do the work for them. You want to convince them why you are the best candidate is ultimately this goal. So at the base, you should do a surface level kind of deep dive into what the organization is about, what you can sense that their needs are, and figure out, kind of think about what would be your transferable skills. So for example, my first job out of college was doing sub-marketing and customer service stuff for Chick-fil-A, right? And you think Chick-fil-A has nothing to do, well, maybe it's Christian chicken, I don't know, but with the conservative movement. But I took that experience and said, I'm really good. I know how to relationship build from this. I know how to serve different audiences. Like there's different, you know, if it was your babysitting job or if it was, you know, you were involved in a Greek organization in college, just take whatever skills you can find and figure out how to transfer that to the position, if particularly when an initial position they're dictating kind of things they're looking for. You have to tie how you fit into what they're looking for in your application. And with your cover letter too, your cover letter, I think, is how you frame your resume. So here's your resume, it should be really clear and easy to read. Your cover letter is your chance to tell them about the really important things in your resume. So you're framing that conversation.
That's great advice. A question that I have that builds upon that are most interviews right now are remote, right? They're virtual interviews. I know, Katy, you do almost exclusively virtual interviews, even outside of the now times, because you work remotely and you're filling roles all over the country and you don't happen to live in the DC area anymore. How do you make it so your interview, that you're prepared virtually as you would be in person? What are the materials that you need to have together? And how do you make sure that those materials are presented in a professional way that makes you stand out?
I guess take a stab at this first. So I like to say in an interview process, in person or not in person, virtual or not, you really want to be yourself, which is hard to do. As someone who is I always thought I was terrible at interviewing, so it's funny that I do it a lot now, but I recognize in myself that I am chatty. I'm one of those people who goes into an interview and like can't stop talking, right? Because I get really nervous. And just like take a moment before your interviews to recognize things like that in yourself. Maybe you're really quiet. Maybe you need to write out what you're going to say beforehand so that you know what to say and how to say it. Maybe you talk a lot like I do, and you have to in your head say, stop talking, Katy, because I have had to do that, right? And that doesn't matter whether it's virtual, if this is an interview right now, or if it's in person. Being yourself and being who you're going to be in a work environment is really important, because an interview is two ways. You want to be a fit at that place. You want to get along with these people. So you want to present yourself professionally, but as you are. So with that, I say, as far as materials, if you're going to take notes during an interview, which I encourage you to do, say beforehand that you're doing that, because if I'm here in an interview and I'm like this, they're going to think I'm not paying attention, right? But if you say beforehand, I'm going to take notes. So if I look down a few times, that's what I'm doing. So they know you're not texting someone. I would advise not taking notes on your laptop, because you can hear people type and that's kind of annoying. Background is a question I get. I think everyone right now has a great background. I wish I had a sweet library, because Patti and Claire both have that. But something neutral. I've seen moving backgrounds. Don't do that. That's weird and also really distracting. But I think that just as long as everything is appropriate, it's not a big deal. If you're going to take notes, say something beforehand. But otherwise, really the key to interviewing virtually is just being yourself. Nice, Patti. I actually like that one. You know, it's eclectic, it's fun, it's not annoying. It's who you are. So I think the background can actually speak to that. And if you're interviewing at an organization, now I'm going to get really distracted, that is more fun and outgoing and upbeat, like something like that is great. So just really know where you're interviewing and where that fits in, but also remember to be yourself, because a work environment is something you spend a lot of time in. If you're going to be working in person at some point, you spend a lot of time with your colleagues. You want to get along with them. So I think the number one piece of advice I have is to be yourself, because you don't want to present something different than what you're going to be doing every single day.
And what if you're not very likable? I mean by that.
Uh-oh, you muted yourself again.
I'll laugh at that, but what I really mean is, what if you are really bad at coming across likable on a virtual interview? Is that you're not natural, you are unsure where to look, and you're getting really nervous because it's weird. It feels like you're not really talking to anyone. You can't take any context clues out of out of your surroundings. How do you prepare for that? And Teri, I really would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I do a lot of interview coaching. And so part of that is I tell individuals that you should just be prepared with some examples of things that you've done. There's certain standard questions that are going to be asked. And so you shouldn't be surprised when they're asked, like, okay, tell me a little bit about yourself. You should have an understanding that they're not so concerned about your personal life, but giving them some context about like where you went to school, like what you studied, what you're hoping to do, and why you think this role or organization is exciting for you. Have some knowledge about what the organization is doing, or maybe a recent event that has happened at that organization. So you're going to be able to speak to that. Like, oh, I noticed that you got a new president, or I noticed that this is something that's new that's happening at your organization. Like having that on hand is really helpful. I find for people that may not interview well, one thing I always encourage individuals is to try to either take a pause. I think sometimes we all get uncomfortable with silence, and silence is fine. And so if you get asked a question and you don't know how to answer it right away, you can always follow up with a clarifying question and say, so what aspect of this would you like me to share? Or, you know, ask, am I understanding the question correct? And then that also makes it so it's more of a conversation. And always think about it as kind of like what Katy said, like you're interviewing the organization too, to see if you're gonna be a good fit, and they're interviewing you. And so you wanna have a conversation without being too casual. So obviously you don't, wanna make sure that you're presenting a professional side of yourself, but also your authentic side. So that's kind of what I encourage young professionals to do, is just make sure you have some examples about like a time where you have some critical feedback, a time where you innovated an approach, or a time you also collaborated or provided insight to how to do something better. Like have those at the palm of your hand so you can speak to them quite easily.
Also have water, because it's always fine to take a water break. That's never going to be awkward. If you're in your head thinking, oh no, I don't know what to say, take a sip of water. I think that's totally fine, and it's a really good way for you to like collect yourself.
More excellent advice. Now let's talk a little bit about the materials that you're preparing, your resume, your CV. You have all those things, you apply, you get the interview. Now, what are the things that you wish job seekers in the now times understood that they're not quite understanding right now? What has changed for your needs, your organization's needs, that you need them to adapt to and to be comfortable doing now?
I can say one thing, since I don't hire for Talent Market usually, I hire for other organizations. I think as a job seeker, you really need to understand how long this process actually takes. I get a lot of people who apply and then 2 days later say, hey, any news on my application? And it's likely at that point, the hiring manager hasn't even looked at your resume and cover letter yet. And that might not be the case. Some people read them immediately, but when you just think about, even when you're posting a job, say I was hiring for Talent Market tomorrow and I'm hiring an assistant for me, which would be kind of cool, but that's not happening. So I list the job. I'm not going to start reading all these applications. I'm going to give it a little bit of time, because I'm going to set aside a chunk of my day to sit down and say, here are the 15 applicants we got. I'm going to read through them all and compare them. And that might be 2 weeks after I post the role. And that's the case for a lot of organizations, which, if you think about it from a hiring manager's perspective, is smart, because then they're not taking a few minutes of all their day and they can compare every candidate that they've gotten so far. It gives them more knowledge and information. So with that, I say you shouldn't expect to hear anything for at least 2 weeks. You might get a, hey, we got your application, thanks for that. But you may or may not move forward in the process for at least 2 weeks, and that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean you were automatically pushed to the side. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get an interview. It just means that the hiring manager is really busy because COVID has made everyone's job crazy, and so they can't prioritize that right away. But know that they want to, because if they're hiring right now in the midst of a pandemic, it means that they really need someone. So don't be that person who's pestering them, because that will just serve to annoy them. So I think a really big thing to know, especially right now during COVID times, is you should wait at least 2 weeks before saying, hey, is there any news? Do you have anything to tell me? Solely because so many hiring managers are so overwhelmed right now. And then from there, you might get an interview and you might not get a second interview for a while. The process is just slowed down. The average role at Talent Market, I think, takes something like 60 days to fill. That's 3 months. And lately they've been a lot quicker, but sometimes that's just not the case. So I think patience is super important, and understanding that just because you don't hear something immediately does not mean that they're uninterested in you.
Something I really want to thank you for making that point, because I think people assume that the job search is going to go very quickly for them. In reality, it could take months and months. And that's really disheartening for a lot of people to hear, especially if you're out of work currently, that it's not that you're looking for a new job, you're just looking for a job. You need to pay the bills. What are some words of wisdom that you have for job seekers to keep their chin up, and things that they can do in the meantime that will make their portfolio stronger or just make them more desirable as a job seeker to a hiring manager, where you say, oh, wow, you've been doing this during your unemployment. That's incredible. I'm really impressed. I'd love to give you an interview and to hear about your experience doing that. What are things that impress you that aren't necessarily a job that someone had?
I think I can jump in here. So one of the things that I think is really great, if you can get certifications or training in areas where there's a gap. A lot of young professionals aren't super proficient in Excel, and that is a really strong asset to have when it comes to like basic equations, like building charts or doing different things. So if you can go online, get some certifications while you're unemployed, that's going to make your resume more competitive. Another area is if you're interested in communications and then you start a blog, it doesn't cost you anything. You can start a blog and start writing, and then you can put that link in your resume for writing sample. So then even though you may not be actively working for an organization where you're writing articles, it shows that you're so committed to writing that you're doing it on your free time. And so anything that can give you that competitive advantage, use this time to learn as much as you can possibly. There's all these resources online for free on how to learn new skills, even if it's like Photoshop or different softwares that can help you become more competitive. And then you can add that on your resume. So the the recruiter, whoever the initial person that looks at your resume is going to say like, oh, this person can really come in and create value here. Look at all the things that they're doing or all the skills that they have.
Patti, you're still on mute.
Sorry. One thing I would add there is that now organizations have become leaner during the now times. A lot of them have, because of budget concerns. You can't do as many programs as they used to be able to do, and they're just kind of in a holding pattern. So the positions that they are hiring for, they're looking for people who can do more than one job. You're looking for someone with kind of, a Swiss Army knife of skills that they can step in and help any team in the organization. So if you are that person, if you're that job seeker, or you're willing to be that job seeker, you have a much better chance of scoring yourself an interview. And building upon just things you can do during the gap in employment, where you finally get that interview, how do you explain a gap in the employment? Is that how do you let people know that you have been doing something else, or you've been volunteering, or you know what, I couldn't even volunteer, and I've just kind of been sitting watching Netflix for the past 6 months because there's nothing else to do because I'm stuck inside with a mask, or I gotta wear a mask to go anywhere. Claire, what advice do you have for those job seekers?
Yes, so definitely don't do the next Netflix thing, as tempting as that is. Probably not helpful. We actually did have a candidate that he had some gaps in his resume and just totally was flummoxed when explaining it. So if there is a gap, if something's going on, be ready to talk about it and kind of have your narrative ready to go as to maybe how those circumstances came to be, or what you're looking for in the future and why maybe this wasn't the best path, and now I'm going on this path, and this is why this organization fits in that path. Use that time to, and those gaps to construct that narrative. And just like everyone has said here, find something to do to talk about what you're doing in the meantime. Like for me, for example, for a gap, I worked on a campaign. I never would have thought I would have worked on a campaign, but I needed something to do during that gap. So I got a ton of great experience working on a campaign I wouldn't have otherwise if I hadn't had that gap. And I think that helped me on the next step. So just be prepared to speak to what your current circumstances are, but also how that applies to where you want to go.
I just wanted to make a quick note because I did see a lot of people say they're entry level. Don't be afraid to take an internship after you graduate. That's what I did. I could not find a job. I graduated in 2010. In 2011, in September, I took an internship. It was brutal. I lived at home way too long, but don't be afraid to take that internship because it turned into a job for me. So as distasteful as that might sound, and as disheartening as it is, because you probably have friends who graduated 2 years ago and got a really sweet job right out of college. Times are different now. So don't be afraid to take an internship. That's not a step back. You're moving forward. You're doing something. And I think that's really important.
Thank you for that advice. Another thing that some people might be missing on their resume, and we were talking about this before we went live earlier this evening, that more and more people are deciding that college is not for them. What do job seekers who have not finished college or started college do in a job market where it seems that every single job posting requires a college degree, and a job market that unfortunately encourages a master's degree to even be competitive in the public policy process? So what advice do you have for those job seekers?
Well, I would also go back to the internship or associate program, not to like be so super self-serving, but our programs don't require a degree. And also the Society of Human Resource Management is also creating new norms and best practices against organizations requiring a bachelor's degree to enter for entry-level roles or for a lot of roles, because it's an unnecessary barrier and it's preventing them from attracting and retaining really great talent. And so I think another way in is if you're doing an internship and they see how exceptional you are and they see how much value you're creating, a lot of times organizations are willing to create an opportunity for you or convert you to full-time. And so unfortunately, way too many organizations require a bachelor's degree for entry-level work. And I think that is unfortunate, and it's a disservice to the organization and the talent that they're missing out on.
I would be willing to, if you see that on a requirement as a role, and maybe, I don't know if we don't have it, if maybe everyone here has a college degree, I don't know. But if you don't have a college degree and you see a role that requires it and you think you're a great fit otherwise, I think you should go ahead and apply. The worst thing that can happen is that you get declined. But for smaller organizations like the ones that we work for, you know, Stand Together is big, but even still, it's not. We don't work at Koch Industries, right? We're not tens of thousands of people. Someone's actually reading your resume, even if it's only brief. But I think it's worth it for you to write in your cover letter, hey, you know, I don't have a college degree, but here are all the reasons you should hire me anyways. I think that would be very impressive. So don't be afraid to apply for jobs that say you need a college degree if you don't have one, unless you need a master's in something very specific. You know your limits and understand where those fall, because it's the same thing as applying to a stretch job, as I talk about a lot with a lot of young professionals. You say, you know, I checked 7 out of the 10 boxes. Maybe I have 2 years of experience instead of 4. Should I apply for that role? And I say the answer is yes. Now, if you have 2 years of experience, you should not apply for the 10 years of experience role that you're interested in. So know your limitations, but I think a college degree requirement falls right under that as well.
What I would also just add to the end of that is if you do not have a college degree, let's say you are 8 credits short or 9 credits short, whatever it may be, do not lie and say that you have a college degree, because that will come back and bite you in the bottom and you will be let go. It's just be honest, say, you know, I'm just a few credits short, I don't have a degree, and then let the employer decide then with you being honest. That's kind of with anything that might be questionable, is be honest and upfront ahead of time so you can have a discussion rather than just getting a talking to and then getting fired. This is a question that's becoming more and more the norm because nobody wants to keep their resume to one page. You know, even entry-level job seekers, because entry-level job seekers, you've been told before in college or high school even, you gotta have internships, you gotta do volunteerism, you have to be in clubs, you have to do X, Y, and Z. You have all of this, and you have part-time jobs, you know, like working in a movie theater or wherever it is you may be working. And all this stuff fills up more than 2 pages. But we have this awesome website called LinkedIn now, where you can have your entire resume listed out on LinkedIn. How do job seekers utilize LinkedIn with their resume so they can work in tandem to show the best possible them going forward with their job interview? And Claire, I'd love to start with you on this one.
Thing. So similar to what I was saying before, is your resume is your chance that they have a job description that says that they need X. Your resume is that chance to go through and highlight, I did X and this project, we went from this to this, and this is how I accomplished X. So your resume is that chance to, what's the proper word now, curate. It's your chance to curate yourself and your experience to their needs. So if our hiring managers will go and look at LinkedIn, we'll probably also be looking at social media. That's what I did, honestly. I went and looked at their social media and their Twitter and stuff to be prepared for that. But LinkedIn is that spot where you can go through. I think I might even have some high school stuff left on mine. I've been out of high school for way too many years. But it's that place to go to where you have references and you have maybe articles that you've published. You have endorsements for different skills. So hiring managers will go online and look at all these different things, but the resume is your chance to capture that attention and say why you fit the needs of that role.
That's excellent advice. I have one question left from my list before we can open it up to questions from our audience. So all the attendees, I hope that you were thinking of good questions. That we have a few in the queue right now that I'm excited to ask. But the thing that matters to me a lot, and a lot of job seekers don't think about this, but it has definitely sealed a deal for me in the past, which is a thank you note. Receiving a thank you note from someone who I have interviewed or helped out with some career or job advice. How important is a thank you note still? And usually it would be handwritten and mailed to someone. No one's in the office anymore. Is an email to an individual sufficient at this point in time? And do you have any advice on how to change up the thank you process with job seekers and their interview process? Who do they go to, et cetera, et cetera? Katy, I'll start with you, and then I'd love to hear from Teri and Claire, all three of you.
So a handwritten thank you note is really awesome, and it's very impressive. I will say that I get this question a lot. Well, I wrote a handwritten thank you note because I did this. I wrote a handwritten thank you note back when I interviewed for a job at Freedom Partners Shared Services, what Stand Together used to be forever ago. And I hand wrote a thank you note and I mailed it that day. Well, they told me 2 days later that I didn't get the job. And in my head, I was like, oh my gosh, they haven't gotten that thank you note yet. And it says like, I can't wait to get this job. I mean, it didn't say that, but you know, basically. But in hindsight, so what? I still wrote them a handwritten thank you note, and it's going to be a very good impression. And who knows, like maybe later someday I would work with those people, or, you know, I do work with those people. I work with people at CKI all the time. So it can never be a bad thing to send a handwritten thank you note. That's my first thing. The second thing though, is it may never get to them because they're not in the office. Who knows? So I think a follow-up email is always great, and it doesn't have to be anything complicated. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. I look forward to hearing more about the role. That's it. So I think both is fine. I don't think writing a handwritten thank you note and being worried that it shows up late will ever be negative for you.
I completely agree. It doesn't hurt to write a thank you note. Now that everyone's remote, I definitely think a quick thank you email is perfectly appropriate. And if anything, it just shows that you're polite, you're thankful, you're grateful, you're not taking the process for granted. I think that there's some negative connotations with entitlement. And so when an organization takes time to interview you and you send them a thank you note, that specific person a thank you note, I know I like getting thank you notes. Who doesn't like getting thank you notes? So yeah, and I agree with Katie, like don't make it too long. I one time got like a 4.5 paragraph thank you note. Didn't read the whole thing, but I thought it was really beautiful. And also, if you don't get that specific job, the people remember, like, this person was so kind and send us this thank you note. And we've hired, at my last company, I used to work at a charter school, we've hired people like, oh my gosh, that thank you note was so nice. I wonder if there's another opportunity that would be good for this individual, even though this other role got filled. So it's always a good thing.
Definitely want to echo what Katie and Teri have said, 100% on both of those. We even ask our students to write thank you notes for donors often because we think it's a good practice to kind of be in that posture of gratitude. But one thing, as we've kind of gone through our hiring process recently, is the candidate that got the job sent a thank you note and or checkup after every stage of the interview via an email. And then we do an interview process where you pretty much meet with all the senior team and a lot of the staff. And this person emailed the hiring manager, or jurors in this case, hiring managers, and then wrote a thank you note to each person that got to us later. But we really appreciate that effort. Immediacy is important. And in those notes, thank you for the job, thank you for taking the time. And it's also great if you can include a little tidbit of your conversation, if you can remember just a little bit of, I appreciate talking about X, or thank you for this time for Y. Just that other personal touch where you didn't copy a, this is how to write a thank you note speech. Is just always really helpful in making that connection, which is ultimately what's important.
Thank you all very much for those answers. We've got a few questions. The first one is from Ara, and they ask, can you talk about a good format for an academic CV, not a resume, and how that would transfer well when applying online into those huge databases? So how do you make a CV stand out when it's not an actual resume?
I can take a stab at this, but I am not the best person to answer this question. I'm going to start with that because I have never worked on the back end of a huge database. I've certainly heard about how these things work, and I actually think Patti might have some intel on this. But my understanding is that in huge databases, they search for keywords in your application, or so whatever the application package is, if they ask for a cover letter, or maybe they auto scan your CV, and then a computer literally looks for search words. So when you're reading the job description, make sure that words that are in the job description are also in your CV or your resume, or whatever the case may be, because there's probably a bot out there that says, oh, this person has checked 10 of the 10 boxes they need, so then a human can look at their application. But don't quote me on that, because again, I don't work with that, but that's what I've heard as far as big databases go.
Yeah, so yeah, similar to what Katie said, that I actually helped build the applicant tracking system, iCIMS for CKI education programs team, because we were using Salesforce before. And so the way applicant tracking systems work is, yes, it pulls from your resume, but we're not as strict with it for our internship and our education program, but it pulls from the job posting, and it will say like, oh, this person's a 30% match or 50% match based on what the job posting says and based on your resume. And so if they're looking for someone that has like critical thinking skills, like strategic learner, or like statistics or quantitative analysis, like those things that are on the job posting, you should incorporate them in your resume. And so I'm a big advocate of personalizing your resume for the specific job, because if it's going through an applicant tracking system and it's not a certain percentage of a match, a lot of times it won't even get to the recruiter for a screening. And typically the way that works is the recruiter will get it, they'll do a phone screen just to make sure that you align with that position. And then if they feel that you're a strong candidate, they send it to the hiring manager or the key decision maker. That person will look at your resume, and then they might decide to bring you in for either another phone interview or in-person interview, or now a virtual interview. So I think that's what the question's asking, like the database with the applicant tracking system, but I could be wrong in understanding.
And it's also the formatting because formats get screwed up, but
Oh,
you apply for anything, whether you're using CV or a resume,
yeah.
is that you want to do exactly what Teri and Katie said, is mirror what keywords are in the job description, and also the description of the company or organization to which you're applying, because they put keywords in that as well. So you want to make sure that your stuff reflects. It's basically the exact opposite of what we teach when we teach for a resume, when it's supposed to be short, succinct, and just highlight you and your stuff. And this is also the time where I would actually go to a recruiter specific to that industry and talk to them, because they're going to want you, if they look at your stuff and go, this is impressive, but in order to get through all of the stuff to shine so I can actually have someone interview you, you're going to have to tweak it a little bit. And recruiters will work with you on that in certain industries. The four of us are more so experts in the libertarian movement, conservative libertarian public policy process. So our knowledge is vast when it comes to that, but very much siloed. So I don't want us to give you bad advice if you're applying outside of this particular industry. That being said, if you want to email any of us, we can work with you to get you in contact with the person in the industry that you're interested in working in, and we can help you connect with that person. No problem whatsoever doing that. Next question is more about, I think a lot of people have spent time in school, and they're wondering what to do next, and to make sure that they are an attractive candidate out there. So what about someone who is doing other graduate academic pursuits and hasn't been involved or had an internship in several years? What should those people do? Claire, I feel like you probably interact with a lot of these types just by the nature of ISI.
Yes, yeah, and that maybe was a bit of my personal experience as well. Is I did my bachelor's, and then I worked at a university where I got my master's, and then I did a fellowship, and then I spent a couple months looking for a job. Didn't happen immediately, but it's kind of that similar answer to what we were saying before, is how to discern the experience that you do have into the skills that they need. So again, for me, I was a sorority president, and I translated so many organizational how-tos. I figured out how to deal with this communication issue. I figured out how to deal with this personnel type issue, and I took that and had my stories ready to go for the interview for us, how those could apply to different skills that they were looking for. So anything that you can transfer, I definitely recommend doing that. And it could be, in our field, if let's say you had academic experience in the education field, you're translating what you learned in graduate school to the needs of that organization and for that policy issue, for example. So I'm defaulting education because that was me, and I was able to talk about a lot of school choice stuff that was going on. Even though I didn't have personal professional experience with that, I was keeping up with the issues, and I was able to speak to those issues. So it's transferring the experience and the knowledge that you've gained, that you have, to what they need.
Moving on to another question from an academic attendee. Asan asks, or states, I'm a PhD student and have got ABD status. Do employers look favorably at PhD candidates, or is it harmful to have a PhD degree in progress? I appreciate your comments.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I just Googled ABD status because I know nothing about PhDs. If you guys don't know, it's all but dissertation, which is informative and helpful. So I think a PhD candidate, if I look at them, I look at you the same as I would look at other candidates. It just depends on the role. I generally don't work on academic positions. I'm kind of assuming that you're looking for a more academia focused role, and that could be wrong. I have no idea. But I think it just depends on the role. So my thought is, if you're ABD, my hesitation is, can you work full time? or if you're in school still. I think that's the question. If you're an undergrad, if you're in grad school, no matter what it is, as your employer, I want to know when you can start working full-time, if it's a full-time job. So I think just addressing that up front, like, hey, I'm finishing up my PhD. I have to work on my dissertation 10 hours a week. It's a part-time thing. I'm fully ready to dive into a role full-time. So that's a good thing to address in your cover letter. And if you can start work right now, that's great. And if you're capable of doing a full-time role and also working on a dissertation, go you. I'm going to approach it in the how will this affect you being my employee, not oh, I don't want you to be working on your dissertation.
I think that's solid. Another question, we've got a couple questions about thank you notes. So I'm going to combine them. And it's when there's multiple interviews for a position, say more than 2, 3, when should you send the thank you note? And if there are multiple people observing that you don't talk to, should you send them all one or just to those you spoke with? So, and then what's the time frame for them all? Do you send them right away? Do you just send, so it's basically, who do I send them to and when do I send them?
I can take a stab at it. If you interviewed with individuals that day, I don't think it hurts like to send a thank you note that same day while it's fresh, or the day after is perfectly fine. I would only send it to people that you actually engaged with during the interview. If other people were observing, they might be there for training. They might be there just to learn how to do the interview. But that would be my feedback. I've gotten same day thank you notes or within the same week. I wouldn't wait more than like a week or so to send it, especially if it's an email.
Yeah, I would send an email, I think right away that day is fine. And I would send a handwritten thank you note for sure right away, because hopefully it'll get to them sooner and they will see your handwritten thank you note before they decide to decline or accept you like they did for me.
Yeah, and all I would say is that if you do go and interview in person anytime soon, I would, and there's a receptionist, I would send a thank you note to the receptionist like, hey, thanks so much for coming in and being here. And it was really great, like interacting with an actual human. I hope you stay safe and well. Is that you can send, these are times where you can like pull out all the stops and really, really stand out, because I guarantee you, not everyone else, probably nobody else who's interviewed is going to send a note to the receptionist. And the receptionist is going to say, hey, just want to let you know that person sent me a note. It's so awesome. If you don't hire them, then I hope that they stay on the list for a job in the future. You know, is that it's not necessarily all about the job that you're interviewing right now. It could be a job that you are interviewing for in the future. All right, I have one last question, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen. So this is a question. It says, I've been at my current position for 3 years. I turned it from an assistant level position to a manager level position in 3 years. Congratulations, Anonymous. What recommendations do you have for folks looking to make that jump from their first job to their next job? Is it any different than applying for that very first entry-level job after college?
I think if you're transitioning, and if you're at a manager level, you're transitioning to like another manager level position or a director level position, I found that a lot of times relationships are really critical in helping you secure those jobs. I know a number of friends that are like in VP roles or president roles that haven't actually had to properly apply for jobs in a number of years because they had insight. You had a friend that worked at the organization that can give you some inside information, or I still think you should apply, but you can use technology to your advantage. So if you go on LinkedIn and you see that you know somebody that works at that organization, you can ask them if they can be a referral. Most organizations, recruiters have to at least phone screen or reach out to referrals, because if somebody in the organization is referring them, that means that we like the person that works with us. So obviously they're referring someone, that person's also probably great. So we're gonna look at those applications a little differently than we would look at a cold application. So if you can get somebody in that organization to refer you, especially if you're trying to go for a more highly leveraged position, that would be number one recommendation. See if you can find somebody that knows somebody at that organization that can give you some insight into how to engage that organization. And then 3, some of them you can cold apply and you still might get them as well. So those would be my tips.
Well, I think that was a perfect answer. So I am going to turn it over to Kristen. I want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight, and also a special thank you to my 3 fellow panelists. I think that they were all excellent and on top of their game tonight, just like they are all the time. And I hope that all of you at home watching are keeping a higher spirits than most people are right now, and realize that the job search process can take a long time and it can be super frustrating, but the more prepared you are, the fewer mistakes you're going to make, and the better chances are that you're going to get that first job. And we wish you luck, because we have all had that first job, and none of us are doing the same thing that we started doing. And so don't worry if that first job is something that you really don't even want, is that you need a job to get you in the door, and then you can take it from there and just kind of spread your wings and create your own path. So I wish you luck. And Kristen, hand it back.
Thank you so much, ladies. That was wonderful advice, and I really appreciate all of you for taking the time. Before we close out, be sure to check in the chat. I'm seeing some of our panelists are dropping some resources. So if you all want to drop your contact information or links that are going to be helpful for our attendees to find more about programs and information that's going to be helpful, feel free to drop that in there now. And I'll give you guys some time to copy and paste those into notes. We're also going to be trying to share this recording as soon as possible this week. So look out for an email from me on that. And then if you guys ever have any more questions about AF or anything, feel free to just email me. I'll put my email in the chat as well. But yeah, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And again, a big thank you to Leadership Institute and Hillsdale and Talent Market, as well as all of our panelists tonight. So have a good night, and thank you so much.
Thank you.